about fears. Let's talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love.
Welcome to the consult. I'm your host, Julia Cowley. I'm a retired FBI profiler. And today I'm thrilled to have retired cold case detective Ken Maines on the show. And Ken is a true crime veteran. And you're also a veteran. You're in the Marine Corps as well. So not only a true crime veteran, but a real veteran who served our country. So thank you very much. I have tremendous amount of respect for our military. So again, I digress. But you're also known for your tireless efforts working unsolved cases and for founding the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases. And many of you know him from his popular YouTube series, Unsolved No More, where he brings his wealth of experience to bear on some of the toughest cold cases. And that's kind of what brought us together today. Recently, a retired crime reporter, Caroline Lowe, who a lot of our listeners know, she came on our show and we discussed the Jody Huisentruit case with her. She's a mutual friend of mine and Ken's. And she had reached out to me after Ken released a video about his recent visit to Mason City, Iowa, and the Key Apartments, which is where Jody was abducted on June 27th, 1995. And in your video, or in his video, Ken had mentioned our coverage of Jody's case on the consult, and he had speculated that we might have come to a different conclusion than he did. And he had said he hadn't seen hadn't listened to the show yet, but just assumed we'd come to a certain conclusion. And I'm not really surprised that you thought that, because there is a very popular theory out there that most people believe, including a lot of investigators, original investigators, that an older male friend of Jody's was responsible for her abduction and likely murder. And so after watching your video, I just wanted to reach out and let you know, we have almost the same conclusions, maybe not exactly the same, but, similar in that we didn't believe John Van Cise, who is been a main suspect for many years for many people, was responsible. And on our show, we say he should be deprioritized as a main suspect. But I just wanted you to know that because I didn't want you thinking that we just, hadn't analyzed the case thoroughly. So I wanted you to know. And then you and I got to talking, and we thought this was a good opportunity to get together and collaborate and just bring more attention to Jody's case. No harm to just discuss it a little and more in depth. And I'm interested in what your conclusions are, what your observations were, because you did this entirely independent of us. And so it's actually a classic confirmation bias. I want to talk to someone I think will agree with me. So, but I'm just kidding. But I am interested to hear what you think, especially because you did recently visit the crime scene. And one last thing I want to mention before we start the interview or discussion, but I think what makes this even more interesting is that I had seen Ken's name on social media and his association with the AISOCC, or what you founded, and your show, and I thought I recognized your name. I said, I know I worked at one point with a Ken Maines years ago. It probably is the same guy. I wasn't sure, but when I reached out, I said, I think we might have worked together at one point. And sure enough, you looked back in your files, and the people that do the show now actually consulted on one of your cases. And I think it was back in 2011. So confirmed. We have worked together in the past. It's a small world. But anyway, Ken, I'm excited for you to be here today, and welcome to the consult and for this interview.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and talk to some like-minded individuals who actually have done the job. That's always nice to get because they understand as I do.
Yeah.
But we have worked together in the past. I remember the name after. I mean, I saw your name and I was like, it didn't ring a bell right away. And then when you mentioned, I think I might have worked with you. As soon as you said that, it clicked on me. I'm like, yes. And then the other gentleman who works with you,
Bob Drew.
Bob
Yeah.
Drew, the one that I had all the correspondence with.
Yeah, he was the lead.
Yeah.
And as you know, and you know our process, we work as a team. So I was part of that team, and I think Susan, who's also on the show, was also on that case. And the minute you gave the name of the case, it came. I mean, I have a pretty good memory. Especially, I don't want to say I have a photographic memory. I don't know if I could go that far, but I have a very good memory of that case. I remember crime scene photos and pictures very well. So I remember that case. Maybe at some point we'll cover that on the show. I know that case is near and dear to your heart. Oh, I think I think probably any case you get involved in is you
Yeah.
become very passionate about it.
I think sometimes you have to, but that one in particular, yeah,
Yeah.
And you always have maybe a white whale, that you just can't quite get to. You can deduce your possibilities, the probabilities all day long, and maybe you can go from 10,000 to 1,000 to 100 to, in this case, 3, and then you get stuck, and you just can't move forward from there. And as you well know, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
Right.
A lot of these cold cases are solved, and solved being in quotation marks. The police department and the people that have worked in that police department over the years, they know certain people that committed the crime, but there's no evidence. What do you do? So I always tell people that just because a case is cool doesn't mean it's not solved. There might not be total resolution to the case, but it's solved.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, basically, there's no justice.
Absolutely.
It's solved. You've done all that you can do, and there's no justice. I do always have hope because I have seen cases that I thought would be impossible to get solved in some way, whether it's through technology, whether a deathbed confession, even. And sometimes that may be what a case needs, and it ends up getting solved. But ultimately, it's difficult when it goes so long and there's just no justice. So it is. It is. So, but anyway, that's how Ken and I know each other from years ago, and I'm glad that we were able to connect and do this today. And this hopefully won't be the end of our collaboration. And I think we both feel strongly that we want to continue to highlight some of these very difficult cases, especially this one. And when we get the opportunity to do it, we will. And when I saw that you had gone out to the key apartments and looked around, and we never did that. And sometimes at BAU we would go to the scenes, other times we wouldn't, and we would rely on photographs and we'd rely on video and the descriptions by the detectives. But there's no substitute for actually visiting a crime scene. And we tried to do that when we could, but it wasn't always feasible to do so. But anyway, what drew you to Jody's case? How did you get involved in it?
To be honest, I am drawn to all missing persons cases, I feel like, or unsolved cases. It's just a passion of mine, always have been since I was a teenager, watching unsolved mysteries. And I was just fortunate enough to be able to follow that path, although there was some bumps in that road, I won't lie to you, to get me to be a police officer and eventually a detective, and to where I am today. But Jody's case, I believe that Miss Lowe had reached out to me. And I think that's what started it. And once, probably just like you, once you start, like those first couple paragraphs, couple photographs, I get vested. Like, and then it's just the ball rolling and you just become consumed, even if it is only for a short period of time, sometimes 2 days, but for those 2 days, total focus. Sometimes it's 10 years, like the case we had talked about earlier. But that's how I got involved in it. And then as 3 weeks ago, I was taking a cross country trip to clear my head of some things. It's a vacation. I'm going to Montana, I'm going to hang out, but it's never a vacation when you're a detective, I guess, or when you're passionate about it, because then I was like, well, I'm going through Iowa. I did this case, I was vested in it for however long I was. There's nothing, like you said, like going back to the crime scene. I want to see it, I want to feel it. I've got to go. That's just all there is to it.
Right.
Hence my trip to the Mason City.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this particular crime scene is that it hasn't changed much. Most of the time, or many times on these cold cases, the crime scenes are gone. The houses have been torn down, or the neighborhood is completely different, or there've been huge changes. But in this case, it looks almost the same, wouldn't you say?
I would say almost to the T. I guess the carpet in the building itself has been changed, but structurally, it's the same. Parking lot looked the same. I mean, so it was
Yeah.
very, it was in like a lot of times you'll go, if you don't go to the scenes, you just rely on photographs or even videotape. You don't get the perspective. Because there's been cases where I've done that. Rely on the photographs, video, and you study it and you study it, looking for that little clue. What are we missing? And then you go to the scene and you're like, you're blown away. The perspective is just so much different. The case that we had talked about, I had watched video of that, photographs of that for a year, studying it until I was granted access to the residence. And when I went in there, it completely changed everything for me. The room where the bodies were found was so much smaller than what the pictures looked. It looked like a normal room. But then when I was there, I realized, hey, these two victims and an offender, that's cramped quarters. They had nowhere to go. And it did it move the ball for me? Maybe not, but mentally for me to be able to visualize that, there was no substitute.
Yeah. I remember once, sometimes it, like for us, behaviorally, it will move the ball a little bit. We went out to a crime scene out in Utah, and it was a small kind of bookstore slash antique store that was connected to a person's home. And when we got there, we realized, oh, wow, the door to this store is not noticeable from like the street. So you would have to know that it was there, or you'd have to see somebody walking in right at that moment. And so it really changed our perspective. Wait a second, this is probably somebody who lives very close, knows that this person goes to work into that door every day. And sure enough, it did turn out to be somebody from the neighborhood. But by seeing that, like, you couldn't tell from the crime scene photos that this would not be recognizable as an entrance to a store from this, from the street. So it can change. It can change your perception. So I always felt like if I couldn't get to a crime scene, I might be missing something. So that's why I'm going to put you on the spot about this case, since I haven't been out to the key apartments. And I would do the same thing. I think if I was passing through, why not stop by
Right.
and get a look? So what were your other than that, it really like hadn't changed much. What were your impressions of the area, of the scene itself?
Nice area is what I thought. I always start kind of assessing things, not when you get there, but when you're a few miles out and you're driving in. Take notice to the houses. What condition are they in? businesses. If you're driving through a drug-induced area where there's people on the street corners and stuff, and it was nothing like that. It was very residential, and the apartments came up on me pretty quickly, and there was a park not far from there. So when I left the Kia apartments, I went to that park because it was so nice. There was a creek running through it. I just pulled in there and sat for a while and wrote some stuff down, but very nice. Scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it an 8, is how nice of an area it was. Now, just because it's a nice area doesn't mean there's not shady people. That can happen anywhere, as you know, but right off the first glance, nice area. A lot of cars in that parking lot. And I got there pretty early in the morning. Now, that could have changed, but if they haven't added apartments in that area, I mean, it's going to be about the same amount. It would be my guess.
Right.
So one of the first things that I noticed when I pulled into that apartment was, wow, there's a lot of people here. Somebody got abducted right from this parking lot. Nobody saw anything. Realizing the time, 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, but they had to have heard something, and only 2, 3 people. That's what my first thoughts were.
Mm-hmm. And when you pull into the parking lot, did it seem smaller and more cramped or more expansive than your impressions from like photographs?
Actually, I think the photographs in this case were pretty much right on. I didn't get the feeling that it was bigger or larger. Maybe, if anything, maybe a little smaller because of all the cars being in there. So you have apartments on both sides of you, and then you have 2 rows of cars. So a little cramped quartered. I did walk to the back, and I didn't know that there was a creek there, or not a river. I mean, it was a little bit, seemed like a little bit bigger than a creek, but I did know that that was there. But I did take notice to that as well. And the dumpsters being right there, I pulled out the old crime scene, and it was in the same location, but I don't think there was a fence around it at that time. There is now. Same shrubbery around the areas, and I was looking for an advantage point of the offender where they could jump out, surprise. And as I kind of explained in my video, the offenders, everybody that I listened to wanted to say that the offender could have been hiding behind the dumpster, behind the building, or behind the shrubbery on the side of the parking. And sure he could. But the reality of it is you're abducting her. You're not killing her there in the parking lot. So you have to take her from the scene. What's the advantages of hiding at a distance and having to run to close that distance to get to her and then take her to an awaiting vehicle? It is much simpler and more plausible, I believe, is if a vehicle is close, whether you pulled up or you're parked next to her Miata, and you just grab her and throw her in there.
Yeah, that's what we thought too. We definitely, we considered that someone could have come through the woods. I think you have to consider that, but we didn't think necessarily, like you said, could happen. They could have been waiting behind a dumpster, running at her, but it just happened so quickly, and it was a blitz attack almost. So we had the same impression that somebody just grabbed her and had the car right there, threw her in the car, because you're right, she wasn't killed there. The intention wasn't to kill her there. The intention was to take her somewhere else. So, I mean, I guess that kind of explains like how that formed what you think the dynamics of how this unfolded that morning.
Yeah, I mean, if it's 4 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, or wherever she has to go to work, the normal person is not up at that time, meaning the offender. So to me, that led to, hey, well, it certainly is a premeditated act, and it's somebody that more than likely knew obviously where she lived. It wasn't just a random person driving down the street and saying, hey, well, let's stop at these apartment buildings because it looks like an easy target. How could that be when you have 16 cars there and 30 apartments or whatever it is? That's not an easy target. It's more, hey, my mind is made up on this person. I know where she's coming out of. I know what her car looks like. I'm going to choose a time. I'm sure that offender was there before this and had watched her, knew what time she went to work, and then he just implemented the action and to get her, and whether that's working up the courage to do so. Maybe he had sat there the night previous and said, okay, I'm going to do it, and then chickened out. I don't know. But I do know that it was premeditated and somebody knew that she was coming out of those apartments at that time.
Right. Premeditated. And this was not somebody that was there to confront her, have a conversation with her. And there was no, like, as we would call it, escalation. Like somebody's talking to her, they escalate to a fight of some kind. And then, he hits her and then has to get rid of her. It wasn't like that. I completely agree. Somebody had made up their mind that they were taking her, and there was not going to be any kind of discussion whatsoever. So do you think, and I know you talked about this, I want to remind everyone, Unsolved No More on your YouTube channel, but do you think her lifestyle as a news anchor and being popular in the community played a role in her selection as a victim?
I mean, the probability of that, I believe, is high. But her just being, or any victim that's a good looking female, unfortunately, has that potential. The guy could have seen her in the supermarket around town. But certainly, I think the probability that she was, on the news, probably had something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
At least getting her face out there and them knowing. As you know, there's some crazy people in the world, and there's nothing that we can do about it except try to solve these cases, I guess.
Right. What factors, if you can think of any, that made you, I guess, question the initial theory that John Van Cise was involved? And to remind our listeners, John Van Cise was 49 at the time. Jody was 27. They were friends. They did a lot together socially in terms of going, water skiing, and would go out to bars and with friends and things like that. And they were pretty close. Many people suspected him. What made you question that he was involved?
Well, number one, I don't know if he was a suspect early on. I know that the police ended up doing a search warrant on some trackers or something on his vehicle in 2017.
Right. He was a suspect very early on, right? Almost right away, which I think he has to be. I don't fault that. Was one of the people closest to her. You got to rule him out.
Well, yeah, especially he came to the scene, right? I mean,
He did.
that morning to say, hey, Jody was with me the previous night watching this video. The thing that ruled me away from him, though, him coming to the scene there, yes, that bothers me a little bit. But what overrides that sense for me is this. If he's telling the truth and she was at his place previous, why not do your dastardly deed right then and there? Why would you chance being seen by these people in this apartment? It's not like it's a secluded house. You're going to go there at 3:30 in the morning. Yes, John would know that she's leaving at that time, but why chance that? Now, some people will say, well, they would chance it because he's going to make it look like it wasn't him. Really? You're going to chance being witnessed by all these people instead of waiting till, let's say, the next night. You invite Jody over and there's no witnesses in your house. And you can kill her and take your time and do things. There's no rush. There's no panic. That's what really steers me away from John.
I agree with that. There would have been better opportunities for him that were less risky if he wanted to harm her. And the other thing that I thought, and this goes to her victimology, a lot of people had talked about him. Oh, he's obsessed with her. He wanted to date her and she rejected him. And what I think people forget about Jodi is that, yes, she was attractive and very nice and sweet to people, but she was also very smart, very savvy. She had career aspirations. And the one thing I remember somebody telling me about her is that she was not a phony. Like no, in no way, shape, or form was she not a phony. That was the real Jodi. And I don't feel that she would have maintained a close friendship with somebody that made her uncomfortable. It just wasn't her nature. She was more a very genuine person. I think she would have kept her distance. I don't think she would have been someone to lead another person on. I mean, she may have known he kind of liked her, but if he truly pushed the boundaries and made her uncomfortable, I don't think she would have maintained any kind of relationship with him. And so her victimology suggested to me that this was not somebody who was, maybe in the back of his mind, if she ever wanted to date him, he probably would have taken that opportunity, but he wasn't willing to risk his friendship with her to make her uncomfortable in any way. And according to her friends, close friend that had been with them that previous weekend, there was nothing that occurred that made Jodi uncomfortable in any way. There were no problems. They got along. And so that's kind of another reason that we felt like this was not likely him.
Well,
so
I would say I would counter that a little bit and go against my own and your thought there in this aspect. If John's telling the truth and Jodi was there that night and he did put the moves on her or whatever it was and she rejected him, and for some reason he was able to control that rage right then and there and not do anything, and she departs, and then he has time to stew and time to fester, maybe not even sleep that night. I wouldn't rule out completely that then he knows that she's coming out of that at 3:30 or whatever, and then he comes to do that. But I wouldn't think that he would abduct her. He would kill her there. That's my only drawback is saying, well, 1000% it would not be John. And you would look into his background and to see, what triggers him, and if he gets turned down, what does he just get depressed or does he lash out? And those things would be important to know.
Right. And he tended to, what we learned, maybe get upset about little things, like and flare up really quick, and then it would just die down. He wasn't one to stew about stuff. That tended, to be what people generally described him in terms of his temperament. But I don't think we know for certain. We don't have a ton of information about him. And I think that's the theory most people have, that those who believe Van Cise is responsible, that something happened at his apartment. She rejected him. He got mad. He stewed about it all night. And then he went and abducted her. But I would also think at least there would have been some kind of like phone call or apology or some sort of attempt to discuss this with her. Like, I'm sorry, or please give me another chance. And so he, if that did happen, he didn't try whatsoever. It was something so awful. He didn't even try to call, reach out, have any kind of further discussion with her. And I think if it was something that was that bad, she might have called a friend when she got home, told somebody, this is just horrible. This has happened. This is speculation. We don't know for sure, but those are just sort of my thoughts about that possible theory. Like you said, you can't rule that out, that we just don't have enough information. I just think it's less likely than somebody who probably stalked, followed her.
Yeah, and there was certainly, I mean, to me, there was a van spotted in that key apartments, right? A white but economy
Yes.
van. I mean, you don't get much more of a smoking gun than that to me, because it's not like it's in 1,000 apartments that are there. You have 15, 30 apartments, whatever it is. Okay, you interview every single one of them. Do any of you know anyone that has a white econo lodge van or whatever it is? The ones that say yes, well, you go and interview them. It's that simple. And if it all comes back clean, well, hey, we are looking for somebody with, because it has no business idling at 3:30 in the morning in that apartment complex if it doesn't belong there, right?
Right.
I mean, so to me, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Now, finding out who's it belonged to, well, that's a different story. But if John didn't have access to it, well, then you can deduce that it wasn't him.
Right. He had a blue van at the time, some sort of little minivan, which was there's footage, news footage of him, and he's driving a blue van. So he didn't drive this kind of vehicle. And she had reported several months earlier being followed by a white truck and had also reported some obscene phone calls to people. That's never been verified through phone records or anything like that, but she had mentioned to somebody about changing her phone number because she was receiving calls. Now, were those just random calls or were they specifically toward her? We don't know, but it was made her uncomfortable enough that she mentioned changing her phone number. So, she was also starting to take self-defense courses. So all these things were interesting to us. There was something that was maybe bothering her that she just couldn't really put her finger on, I think. But is that related? Possibly. I don't think you can rule that out either.
No, I would say that it more than likely is. This was 1995. What you had to do is grab a yellow phone book that's hanging at a payphone and look up Huisentruit, and it'll give you probably the address and certainly the phone number. And
Did.
that's the first indication of a stalker, is you got to work your way up. So the first is distance, which is a phone call, or driving by the key apartments, and then working your way up to a phone call before the abduction. So I would say that stuff probably was all related.
Yeah. We thought so. We thought this is just very coincidental that she was reporting feeling uncomfortable and being followed, and then this happens to her. So it would be just quite the coincidence if it's not related.
Sure.
How does public opinion affect cold cases?
What's that?
I was going to say, how does public opinion affect cold cases, in your opinion?
Well, it all depends on the case. Obviously, you have the gamut. You started like John Benet Ramsey, and then you work your way to Gail Matthews.
Mhm.
Cases that I've worked that not a lot of people know about. So, the John Benet Ramseys are going to get all the attention, whereas the Don Millers get none. It's unfair, but it's the way that it works in society, so it runs the gamut.
Yeah. Yeah. The more, I guess, sensationalized cases get all the attention, and then the ones that you don't have those elements of, like, I guess, well, like you mentioned, John Bonet, beauty queen, 6-year-old beauty queen. So certainly that, coming from a family of, it's a millionaire,
Right.
she's in her mansion. And so that is very interesting to the public.
Yeah, the media, I mean, it's up to them, whatever they choose. That's what gets the headlines. The Idaho case, I mean, because it was 4 victims, I think. I mean, and they were college students.
College students. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So what are the biggest challenges or most common challenges you face working cold cases like Jody's?
not having police reports, first and foremost, in crime scene photos. When I get, sometimes I'll get cases from law enforcement, and those are the best because I get the crime scene stuff and I get the reports, and that's where the facts are. I, I can't I can't express how important it is to have police reports. Just the first 25 pages, that's all I need anyhow. A lot of times these cold cases, they have thousands, 10,000 pieces of document that relate to the case. All that is noise, okay? The facts are in that house or wherever the crime scene occurred, and the interviews that take place within, a week after. That's where it's all at. And most of the time, the offender's name is in there. You just have to find it. Everything else is like just rumors that have come in throughout the years, and the longer time period that it is, the bigger the rumors. Now, as a detective, you have to go out and follow them up. But after about the 50th one, you realize this is bullshit. Let's go back to where it occurred. The facts are there within those first 25 pages. Put that puzzle piece together, and then you'll solve the crime.
I totally agree. Those initial reports, for me, crime scene photos, autopsy report, those are the things that I focus on. But as you get removed and you have more and more interviews over the years, even if it's somebody who had information, their stories change.
Yeah.
And not on purpose.
Right.
Oftentimes not on purpose. It just changes, or they can't remember, or they start remembering something in a different way. So those initial interviews that are done are really important. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you know? And I completely agree. Music to my ears, Ken.
I'll give you a short story about how important that is. A couple months ago, I was reached out to by a family member of Brenda Condon. Now, Brenda had went missing in my area back in 1991. I was in 11th grade then, but I knew the case. The sister and the son reached out to me and wanted me to yeah, okay, I'll look at it. I'll do that for you. I spent about 3 or 4 weeks with no police reports, just going off of media accounts, their recollection, interviewing people. And Brenda was taken from a bar when she was getting ready to close. So there was information that the till, the cash register money, was still left in the till. There was still money and stuff on the bar when patrons came in. So it was kind of hard to put things together. I won't say how, but through law enforcement, I got the first 25 pages of the report, what I asked for. And within 2 days, I had it figured out. It cut through all the BS, okay, and it told you details, particulars that nothing out here, all those media accounts and interviews over time distorted, such as a vendor came in that morning, the morning she disappeared. He was the first one in the bar, and he noticed one beer bottle on the table. Now that differs from when everybody said, well, there was some beer bottles on the table. There was one beer bottle on the table, and there was one set of currency next to that beer bottle. And the cash register money was not in the cash register. It was in the safe. It was locked up. Well, that changes everything. So now I know she's already ready to lock up. The money has been transferred to the safe. And there was one offender there who was drinking. And there was suspicion that her boyfriend had done it. There was suspicion that the bar owner had done it. But the money there, she had already tallied it up and it was gone. But yet there was money next to this beer bottle. Well, that tells me that that's a tip. Because if it was for the sale of the beer, it would have been with the cash register money. And one beer bottle tells me that there's one offender. And that money was his. So everything was done for the night. She was getting ready to go, but there was one offender there, and he had tipped her. That's who did it. Well, I was able to figure out who that was, and let them know. But it was so important to get particulars. The cash register drawer. How many bottles of beer were on that? How much money was on that? And once you figure that out, just put the puzzle pieces together, and then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That's a great story. I love that story. It's a perfect example. Why just go back to the basics. Do you get called into a lot of cases from police departments? Where do most of your cases now come from in terms of?
Anymore. When I was heavily active in ASOC, we would get cases like that all the time. But now that has kind of dwindled down, and I'm just on my own, kind of, every now and again, law enforcement, and I cherish those ones because of having access to the police reports. I would say 90% of the time now it's family that reach out to me, and I cherish that just as well because they're entrusting me, in trying to figure this out. So it's different.
Yeah.
Like to have it. Sometimes family members have the reports. I've had occasions where that happened. I'm like, how did you get this? And they're like, they said the case is closed, and they gave it to me. The case of Phyllis Carson. I get so frustrated, Julia. That her mom goes missing, and I believe they found her body, but there was no arrest, no nothing. And she goes there, and they say, "Oh, we closed the case. We don't know who did it." And she says, "How can you do that?" Well, we just don't know where to go, what to do. She asked for a copy of the police report. They gave it to her. Thank goodness. And she was able to give that to me, and within 3 days. And listen, this is in no way an indication of my skills. I believe anybody who had the police reports and could put things together would be able to do the same thing that I do. And within 3 weeks of looking at, well, this is your guy right here. He's the one who did it. If he didn't do it, he certainly needs interviewed. And they never interview him. Take this back to the department and tell them. Well, she does, and of course, then it's the ego war where, well, who's Ken Maines? He's being a little reckless saying this. Reckless. I've given this to 3 other investigators, and they've all concur that this needs to be done, but yet you won't do it because your ego is too big, and that's the sad part about cold cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another great example of like going back to the beginning. So
There's that,
yeah. Do you think so? That just makes me think, when you do work with police departments or families get involved, do you find that difficult, that they resent your input because of egos? Because I always joke around, there's no egos in law enforcement. They're the biggest egos. It's very hard for us to admit we make mistakes. That's what's great about profiling, is because it's written in our reports. We could be wrong. So it's easy for us to admit it, but just generally in law enforcement, it's really difficult to say we made a mistake.
Well, listen, I've had people say to me, why would you even reach out to FBI, criminal profiling? They're no good. All it is, they're playing guess games. Listen, if you have the mentality of that, right then and there, that tells you something about the people or the entity that's saying it. You don't have the victim's family and the victim's best interest at heart. Accept help anywhere it comes from. If you want to disregard it after you hear it, I can live with that. But you have to listen to it. To me, listening to a forensic pathologist, a criminal profiler, a 30-year-old patrol officer, or a new detective, you have to listen to it all. Take that all in, incorporate it into your theory, and then base that theory off of all the whole pot being stirred up. That's where you get your best results, I believe.
Yeah. I agree. And at the beginning of the show, I was joking around that I like having you on because I think our conclusions on this case are similar. But what I like to do is when I do look at a case and have conclusions, I also like to go either read or discuss with people who have a different opinion than I have to try to understand why they came to the conclusion they came to, so that I can just say, did I miss something? I think it's the best thing to do, especially if you can do it constructively. Sometimes that's not possible with people, but if you can have a constructive conversation with somebody who has a different point of view, or if it's just a case that a high profile case that I'm interested in, and I think, it went one way, someone else has a completely different opinion. I like to, if there are books about it, I like to read about that just so I have a complete understanding. I think you have to take in all perspectives, and you may learn something. It may not help. And like you said, you can take it or leave it. And that's what profiling is. I mean, the investigators, as you know, having worked with us, it's a service we're providing. You can take it or leave it. It's your case. You do what you want with your case. You can listen to us. You can disregard it. It doesn't matter. But I always feel there's might be something that could be enlightening, that could help clarify something if you just talk with other people, particularly with, the different perspectives that we bring to the table as well. So,
well, and that was the whole concept behind ASOC. When I created it, I wanted to get that opinion from the pathologist, from the profiler, from the old detective, from academia. I wanted all of this. Now, that's a great theory and principle, but to put that into play was very difficult, because what we would do is send a case out to all those entities, and they would write back their opinion. You couldn't get them to agree on anything. Okay, well, it was this person because of this. It was this person because of this. So then what you'd have to do is try to, like you said, take something from each one and incorporate that into a big report that we're able to give back to law enforcement. But there was no consensus. And I think that's what law enforcement wanted. Hey, tell me who did this. And we couldn't. We could just say, like you, well, prioritize this person, prioritize this person. This is who needs to be interviewed and stuff like that. But it was very cumbersome, and it just didn't work out because of that, really.
mm-hmm.
But I met a lot of great people through that. I mean, as I talked to you about Jim Clemente and Mark and Mary Ellen O'Toole and Joe Kenda and Warner Spitz and Cyril Weck. I mean, I got to work with, some great people, Henry Lee. So I was very fortunate enough to learn a little bit and take, after reading reports from each little tidbit, which helped me grow. So I would always take something good from anything. And I take that from ASOC for sure.
Yeah, you just mentioned some big names, and it reminded me that, did I read somewhere you got a letter from Vincent Bugliosi, attorney who prosecuted the Manson murders?
Yes, that was a highlight of a day for me, that's for sure. He was on his deathbed. Now, I had written him when I was trying to get people involved with ASOC. I was looking for prosecutors. So I wrote him a letter, and I typed, or maybe it was an email. I think it was an email I sent him, and he sent back a handwritten letter on his deathbed. I didn't even know that he was sick. It was all, you could barely read it. It wasn't very legible. But he said, I did some research. You're a good detective. You got a great idea here, but I am sick. And here he ended up passing away a couple weeks later. So I hold that letter dear to my heart.
That is incredible. So I don't know. I think my listeners, maybe I've mentioned this to them, but the entire reason that I ended up on the path in my life that I did was because of his book, Helter Skelter.
Oh, wow.
And my mother was reading it and she told me, I think I was in middle school. I was pretty young, and it was interesting to me. She's like, you're too young to read this. And when she was done with it, I got it. I read it. After that, there was just no turning back. There was nothing else that I ever had the same interest in as I did true crime. And I knew I wanted to somehow solve murders. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but it was that book, and he was always an idol to me. And I was very sad. I never met him, never had the opportunity to meet him, but I was very sad when I heard he passed away. And then I saw you had received a letter, and that just confirms to me what a great person he was, to take that time to acknowledge you and acknowledge your correspondence when he's, on his deathbed. That's incredible. It's an incredible story.
And that's another thing that we have in common too, is because Helter Skelter and Manson, in his own words, I remember reading when I was in middle school, and my dad said the same thing your mom did. He looked at me kind of weird, like, and he told me later, he's like, I either thought you were going to be a criminal and serial killer, or you were going to be ones to chase him. It was one or the other. And I was rolled with the Manson family. I still am, but for some reason, they intrigued me. And when I got out to dinner with Diane Lake from the Manson family, that was to me almost the pinnacle of my career. Because I remember sitting there and I was peppering her with questions about how they ate, their normal routine, what would Charlie do in this situation. And she was answering them all. And I remember thinking, I've made it. Like, to me, that was it. I was like, I've made it.
Yeah. Same. I was always fascinated by, and not in a good way. I was actually, I would say, more horrified by their lifestyle. And, most people, when they think of hippies, it's peace, love, and understanding and inclusion. And, but I always saw hippies, because of that, as murderers, evil murderers, not good, peaceful people. And my mother would always tell me, that's not what the hippie movement is. It's not murderers. But I was so influenced by it. Probably not healthy for me at that age to read that book. But anyway, it did set me on my path in life. So yeah, we do have that in common as well. Just, it's fascinating. And I'm just incredulous that you got a letter from Mr. Bugliosi, who I just idolized my whole life. And I always thought, I hope I get a chance to meet him and I'll introduce myself to him. But unfortunately, he passed away and I was never able to do that. But I did introduce myself once to John Douglas. So he was at a conference. I got there. He was the keynote speaker. I got there really early. This was before I retired. And he was just over by the refreshments drinking water, and there was nobody else in the auditorium. And I just walked right up to him and I introduced myself and I said, I'm a profiler in the unit now. And your book is, heavily influenced my choice to join the FBI and try to become a profiler. And he couldn't have been more gracious to me. I'm sure he doesn't remember that, but it was an honor to meet him because he's a legend in our field.
He's the only person that I went after twice. Usually if somebody turns me down, I'm done. I don't go back. I went back a second time with him in regards to ASOC. I asked him to be a part of it, and he said, oh, I appreciate it, this and that, but I'm already a part of a group like that and it would be too much on my plate. Yeah, I understand. Well, I waited about 6 months and then I went back. You think you could reconsider?
Yeah.
Give me the same gracious answer, so I understand.
Well, you got a pretty good group there. Big names in the true crime world who have a lot of experience. So
this was part of that as well. I got to meet her and her husband.
Who is that?
Burgess.
Yes.
So she was very, very helpful and nice as well. So yeah, I met him and I am so glad that I did.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, before we go, any final thoughts on Jody's case or cold cases in general, or just any final thoughts at all?
Well,
you have the floor.
Jody's case, I think, is solvable, and that's not just me being optimistic. I think that man is such a key, and I'm sure police did their due diligence on that thing. They may have even tracked it down to somebody who legitimately had it, getting ready to go to work or something. If that's the case, I feel that they need to let the public know that. But if they haven't, that lead needs to be followed up. To the degree. But that's about all I can say on that subject. People I saw would say, well, I can't believe that nobody has talked. People always think that an offender will talk. Well, that's not the case. It depends on the offender. If the offender is a big mouth and he goes to a bar and he likes to brag and he's a narcissist, well, yeah. But if it's just somebody who has a sexual gratification that he needs to fulfill and he lives alone, he's a loner, who's he going to tell? He doesn't want to tell anybody, number one, that he doesn't brag. So no one's ever going to find out until they find Jody's body, if they ever do. So I think sometimes you can relate it to this case, but you can relate it to all cases. You have to be able to deduce the possibilities to probabilities. That's where it all starts. Is this really possible? Is it possible that somebody hid behind those dumpsters? Yes. But is it probable? And when you answer that, you can start deducing. That's when you're going to get your answers. If not, you're going to continually be stuck up here and not be able to get down here where you want to get. So I guess that's where I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. I love it. So, Ken, I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope we can connect again. We're definitely going to stay in touch. There's no doubt about that. But before I go, I want to remind listeners to check out your YouTube channel, Unsolved No More. Okay, so it's Unsolved No More. And you have a website, kenmains.com.
Yeah.
And social media. Now, if I leave anything out, please add it in. But you have a Facebook page. That's Kenneth L. Mains, right?
Yep.
Yep.
I'm not a social media person. In fact, I don't like social media. But I'm very transparent and honest, and social media pays me, so I use it. And I'm grateful for all the fans that are on there and they follow things. And but I want people to know that I'm not a fan of social media and let people know what I do all the time. But for the fans that want to know, and I'm gracious for that. The same with the YouTube platform. I never intended to have almost a 250,000 followers. That was never the intent. The intent was to, hey, this is my passion. I love investigations. I love it. It's my hobby. It's my life. It's not who I am. It's what I am. I wish I could golf. I wish I could fish. I wish I could woodwork. And I've tried them all, but I don't like them. I love cold cases. And so that was why the YouTube channel started. I could talk about it, and people listen, and then more people listen, and then more, and it grew. So then it's almost become a business. And I'm okay with that because I love it so much. And if I can, if people watch, the cases get out there, and I can make a living from all this, well, then I'm going to do it. And that's what I do. And I'm very blessed and I'm very fortunate to be able to do that, to get up every day and do something I love. There's nothing better than that. So
do what you love, the money will follow.
Yeah.
I think there's a book out there. And you're also on X, formerly known as Twitter, right? I know you're not a fan of it, but I still want to put the handles out there. It's at the AISOCC.
Yeah.
And at Unsolved No More. Those are your two handles. So do you have Instagram?
Yes.
What's your Instagram handle? Because I don't.
At Unsolved No More, probably.
Okay, unsolved at Unsolved No More for Instagram as well.
Yeah.
So check out Ken's social media.
Just Google, I guess, my name, and they can find whatever they want about me and go from there, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. If you Google your name, you'll come up with your website, your Facebook page, all of that. So you're not hard to find. So
Well, I wish I was harder to find sometimes, but it's like with doing this interview is, I didn't do interviews for at least three years. I was just asked recently to speak at Penn State University, and I turned that down. And he was a good friend of mine. I just don't enjoy. But sometimes, like this Jody case, and talking to people that have the same interests and same level of communication almost as you and I do, then I do, and I kind of get excited about it. So I thank you for the opportunity to allow me to talk about this and talk to you about the case. And I really appreciate it.
yeah, I'm honored, and I'm the same way. I love talking with people such as yourself that have the passion and made it a career the way I did. Sometimes like you said, you can find people in this career that it's just a job, and then there are those of us that are a little more, I guess, obsessed is a word. But yeah, so it's been an honor. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Yep. That's it for this episode of The Consult. Thank you for listening.
But